It's been nearly 9 months since the UK, mostly England, voted to leave the European Union. You could have had a baby in that amount of time, and suddenly, in 2 days, British Prime Minister Theresa May, through a letter to the European Council President Donald Tusk, begins the process of withdrawing from the European Union. This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. We're discussing the consequences for the United Kingdom as Theresa May triggers Article 50. Joining me for this discussion is a South African in South Africa who usually lives and works in London, Deon Gouws, Chief Investment Officer at the Credo Group. Are you hiding over here? Why are you coming to the Reds of Safety of South Africa as Britain tears itself apart over whether or not it's going to be a part of the European Union?
Yeah, Bruce, I come here quite often. My colleagues and I still service a South African client base. I get here about 5 or 6 times per annum. And here I am today.
No, but it's been 9 months since the Brexit vote. It was the vote that very few people, certainly in London, thought was going to happen. Remind me, I think you were one of those people who said it's a distinct possibility that it could occur.
Yes, and in fact, if you go back to the conversations we may have had, I was quite uncertain about my own vote until pretty much the last week or two.
What did you vote? Remind me.
I voted to remain.
Okay.
And maybe if I can just share an anecdote, I think we all now know that the pollsters got it very wrong, not only with Brexit, also with Trump. They should have just come to our house because my wife and I voted on opposite sides. She voted Brexit. And of course, in my house, my wife has a casting vote. So we were 51-49. The country went 52-48. So my household was a good indicator.
In retrospect, who was right? You or your wife?
In terms of what the right decision was?
Yes.
I think we'll know in 10 years' time, Bruce.
No. Tell me now.
I really think it's very difficult to answer. And the reason I say that is I firmly believe that the next 5 years or so, and when I say 5 years, I just mean a good number of years, it could be longer, are going to be tough for the UK, maybe for Europe as well, but certainly for the UK for all sorts of reasons which we can discuss. Beyond that, on a really long-term view, I think there's a plausible argument that it could in fact be better for the UK. I'm personally a glass half full sort of person. So I'm sort of gearing myself up to believe that it will be good in the long term and that the short-term pain is being made worthwhile, you know, because of the long-term gain. But we'll only know that in the fullness of time.
So you're saying your wife was right? It's the husband's answer.
And I have her permission to say so.
No, exactly. It's always better that way. Now, give me a sense of it, please, because also what's happening on the periphery of this is Nicola Sturgeon agitating for another vote on a separation of Scotland from the United Kingdom in order to remain part of the European Union. There's talk, it may be distant, but Northern Ireland joining up with the Republic of Ireland. Then suddenly the Welsh go, we'd like to be part of the European Union too, please. It's very nice to have you as a neighbour, England, but you can be England and we will be members of the European Union. Feasible?
I think it could happen because of political arguments. I heard your interview with Chris Gilmore previously, and I think he also said that a lot of the driving forces behind these discussions are not so much economic, they're more sort of in terms of sentiment and emotion.
But that's precisely what got Britain into trouble in the first place, and the European Union.
Now, as a participant in financial markets, I tend to look at these arguments in terms of financial consequences, economic arguments and the like. And I think from that perspective, I still believe that Brexit will be, you know, very tough for the UK and somewhat tough for Europe as well going forward. Germany is losing its second biggest partner in the European experiment, if I can call it that. If you then bring it back to Scotland, Ireland, etc., the ones that you refer to, I'm not sure that those smaller members of the United Kingdom can really afford to be on their own. I know there's the whole argument about the tax that Theresa May will lose out, you know, if Scotland goes independent North Sea oil. But if you actually go back to source, if you go back to Scotland, they're going to have a lot less income from North Sea oil than they thought a couple of years ago when they had the last referendum. And Scotland, if you go and analyse sort of social benefits, for example, compared to England, in Scotland, things like university is free for local residents. It's not free in the UK. Scotland's a very generous country in terms of social services. And from that perspective, you need a lot of income, and their income statement has been decimated since the last time they voted. So I think if they vote with an economic hat on, I'm not sure they'll be so gung-ho. But that, unfortunately, is not what gets the airtime.
But we're talking about nearly 1,000 years of antagonism, where the Scots have been fighting with the English have been fighting with the Scots, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of of bodies have lain strewn across battlefields over the last 1,000 years of people who've fought for independence, and Britain has wanted control of Scotland, and Scotland has wanted this independence. Braveheart, as I mentioned to Chris Gilmore yesterday, is just one example, one depiction of that long-running battle. This isn't about economics.
No, you're right.
This is about emotions. It's about raw Celtic pride.
Absolutely. And you only need to listen to the Scottish national anthem, Flower of Scotland, where he says, send him back to think again. And I think the Scots have had time to think again, and who knows what they're going to vote next time around. If they get the opportunity, by the way, because that's not guaranteed yet. Theresa May mailed out for some time before she gives them that opportunity.
Yeah, and Theresa May's got a lot to play for now here as well, because she has got to try and maintain the United Kingdom of Great Britain outside of the European Union. If her empire, for want of a better word, the British Empire is considerably smaller than it used to be, but if her empire crumbles at the edges, well, her Brexit experiment, she'll be, her successor will be going back to the European Union asking to be let back in again.
Correct. And she's between a rock and a hard place. I mean, from the first speech that she gave the day that she was appointed.
Brexit means Brexit.
Exactly. And she was trying to sell to the 48%, saying that we are now going to remove ourselves from this union and it will be fine in the end from an economic perspective and otherwise. On the one hand. And on the other hand, she deals with Scotland, and Nicola Sturgeon says, please don't leave this union, because from an economic and other perspective, it won't be great for you to leave us. So she's basically saying, the one thing to the one constituency and something else when she speaks to Scotland. So that is a little bit of a conundrum, and it's a bit ironic, actually, when you look at it like that.
Britain as a unit, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as it stands at the moment, does it have a better chance of a successful Brexit, a shorter-term pain Brexit, than if we see a breakup?
Britain combined?
Yes.
Absolutely. I think,
as it is right now.
Yeah, ultimately there's safety numbers. There's a lot of, sort of shock absorbers in the system. You've got a more diversified economy and the like. So yes, you're a bigger player. I mean, famously, people are still referring to the UK as the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's not. It used to be, but since the pound has taken a 15% knock, it is now number 6. So we've dropped behind France. And therefore, if you now break us up further, we will go from 6 to probably 7 or 8.
Now, and the French election itself is really interesting, because their nationalist sentiments are as strong, perhaps as they were in the United Kingdom at the time. It's going to be that close potentially between going far right and going more moderate.
That is interesting, and I think people are trying to draw analogies from what happened in the Netherlands recently, where the populists didn't do as well as had been feared.
It's a fundamentally different place, though.
Absolutely, that was the point I was going to make. But I do think there's a bit of a difference between Northern Europe as a unit and Southern Europe. I think most of them, or as they call it, beer-drinking Europe and wine-drinking Europe. In beer-drinking Europe, people are generally richer, and they are generally less populist. If you go to wine-drinking Europe, Southern Europe, I think there's more of a chance there of the populists winning over. I think some place like Italy, for example, when they get the chance to vote on this again, which is going to happen, I think there's a good chance there of an Italexit at a point in time.
It's ironic, though, that Italy is probably one of the countries that can least afford it.
You say so, but I think that if they do break up, I think they will have a fundamentally weaker currency than the effective basket of currencies they've got now.
And that will give them the shock absorber to
yes,
to
and it will be great
economy.
for all the export industry, which is vast. There's good Italian manufacturing, there's car making and the like. It will also be good for tourism, because it'll be a cheaper place to go to. It's frankly, in my opinion, what Greece should have done 2 years ago, 4 years ago, but they weren't brave enough, because they felt the comfort of the sort of the safety blanket of the EU. But
why is it so hard? Why is breaking up the hardest word when it comes to Europe?
Because I think it's a short-term pain and long-term gain aspect. The short-term pain, A, could be much more painful than you anticipate, and B, you have no idea how long it's going to last. And I think that's just the argument. It's a little bit like a CEO of a company. A CEO of a company may have a strategic vision for that company in 10 years and beyond. But if it takes hard steps, then maybe he won't implement it, because he's got share options that vest in 4 years' time. It's that kind of argument, I think.
Economically, what are markets telling you in terms of how this is going to play out?
Well, let's look at the first market that moved on the day. We saw the pound going from 145 to 150 when it looked like Brexit was losing. This was on the day. This was on the 23rd of June. So it improved by 2 or 3% on the day.
When Britain was going to remain in the EU.
Exactly. Yeah. And the next day it tumbled from 150 to about 130, and since then it's dwindled further. It came as low as 120, and it's only now back up to 124, 125, because the dollar is taking a bit of a strain, in the sort of post-Trump bump kind of optimism. So I think if you use currencies as a benchmark, it's telling you that it could be tough. And I think if the first rounds of divorce talks and Brexit negotiations go badly, then I think the pound could drop further. I saw 2 leading major international investment banks coming up with their updated pound forecast a couple of weeks ago. And the one said the pound is going to parity to the dollar, and the other one said it's going to be 140. But frankly, that's a function of how hard the Brexit terms look like, and it's their view of the likely scenario as far as the negotiations are concerned.
As somebody who lives in London, as somebody who experiences one of the most expensive cities on earth, have you noticed an uptick in inflation when it comes to food prices? I remember the most delicious story in the aftermath of the Brexit vote was that Marmite prices were going up. Who makes it? Unilever, or one of the big food companies, and they said, well, we make the stuff in Holland. I know we use British product in order to make it in Holland, but we export the finished product to Britain, and now the pound's worth 15% less. The price must go up 15% in pound terms, and people went mad, said that's not what we voted for, but that's the consequence.
Now, there's all sorts of examples like that. I mean, you can look at frankly, just because of, in the first instance, the currency. So if you look at the cost of fuel, for example, the oil price, yes, the oil price come down, but the currency is sort of weakened as well. There's a number of examples like that. There was a Toblerone example as well, where they kept the same size, but they sort of included less chocolate.
They took out every second bit, yes. Every second little pyramid.
So I haven't really noticed it, because I only, once again, I work for my wife, and she's the Minister of Finance ultimately. She does the shopping. But yes, there are numerous examples which, like the famous Marmite example that you mentioned.
For South Africans wanting to diversify with a relatively strong currency, 15.50, 16 rand to the pound, it's been, a couple of years since we last saw those sorts of levels. Is now a good time to diversify, to take some of your offshore allowance and to put it into the like of capital and counties, for example, share prices that have been bludgeoned lower, companies that we understand better than perhaps UK domestic companies?
I could perhaps comment on capital and county separately, but in terms of taking money out as such, I would absolutely suggest that it's a good thing to do. Not because I think this is the bottom of the pound. So you could take money out today, and in 6 or 9 months' time, that the pound is even weaker and would be a better entry point. But at least take some out now. I mean, bear in mind that the rand today against the pound is 50% stronger than it was about more than 12 months ago.
We hit 25 to the pound.
People think it's 33%. It's 50% because it's a numerator-denominator effect. It costs 24 rand, for £1. It now costs, we don't need to go into the math. It's 50% stronger. 50% ago, people were panicking and saying, I'm looking for a better entry point. They've got that now. It could get even better. And bearing in mind as well that the typical person who maybe listens to the show today or watches the show, I'm guessing, has between 90% and 99%, maybe 100% of their global wealth in one country, in this country, in an emerging country with all those risks. And I'm not even talking politics here, I'm just talking about general emerging market risk. And from that perspective, to get a decent entry point into what will be a fine country. London is not going away. No. It's still a good time zone. It's got the rule of law. It's got the language of business. It will be fine.
There we go. We're not going to talk about capital and counties today, unfortunately, because we're out of time. But Deon Gouws from the Credo Group, he's the Chief Investment Officer at the Credo Group in London. Thanks very much for coming in. Nice to see you in the flesh. More stories on separation, more stories about divorce, more stories about tears and glory, because that's what Britain's all about. Don't let the Brexit bugs bite. We've told you that one before. Good night.